I guess we could just get started now. Whoever trickles in can come in. Great. So welcome to the first Bicep community call. This is going to be pretty fun. We want to get to know you guys. We want to take this time to just have it be casual and have these conversations be just like we're in person. We don't want to oversell you on anything. We just want to have this time be time for you guys. Great, so let's meet the team. I'm Stephanie. I'm a program manager on the Azure deployments team working on end-to-end experience for Azure Resource Manager and Bicep.
I can go next. I'm Alex. I'm a PM on the Bicep team.
I'm Anthony. I'm a developer on the Bicep team.
I'm Marcin. I'm also a developer on the Bicep team.
Hey everybody, I'm Marcus. I'm a PM on the Bicep team.
Okay, I'll go next. Hi everyone, greetings from Amsterdam. I'm a Microsoft employee and I'm contributing on pipeline examples and some other examples on 101, 103, those kind of things. And also implementing Bicep and Bicep templates and actually bringing the awareness within our customers ourselves. And many customers in Scandinavia are gladly using it. And one of the best comments I got was, Pinaki, where have you been the last 3 years? Coming from ARM templates.
Great.
Thanks, Pinaki. Right, how to communicate. So use the chat. We are all reading your messages. We're all monitoring the chat and we will answer the questions as they come up. The engineers have a breadth of knowledge, so do Alex and Marcus, and I'd like to say myself. So we'll be here to answer all the questions. And if you have anything super pressing, please raise your hand. I guess you guys all have the chance to unmute yourself, but we'll try to get through all of the announcements first. And when the questions come up, the question and answering at the end, try to be mindful. Looks like there's upwards to 100 people in this meeting right now. So we'll try to answer all of your questions, but if they all come in at once, it might be a little bit difficult. Right, what is a community call for? It's for you. Like I said, this is the time to have a casual conversation with all of you guys. Get updates on topics that we probably wouldn't cover in our O.5 or our 1.0 calls, or anything in the Ask the Expert session, something that this is the place where we really want to just share with you guys instead of just sell everything to you guys. So be active in the Q&A. Looks like we're already getting some questions. We'll try to answer them as needed, yes. Great.
Okay. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about just what's new. If you've been watching the repo closely, we've checked a bunch of things into the main branch, but haven't done a release since the O.4 kind of major release we did a little over a month ago. So we have a release that we think will be out hopefully tomorrow. If it might spill over to early next week. But here's a bunch of the things that will be included in that release. So the first one is we have two new built-in functions, load text content and load file as base64. So Mikolai, who's in a playground right now with his kids, did these contributions, and we think they're going to be quite impactful. Basically, what it allows you to do is bring in a local file or a local binary, and we will kind of inject it into the compiled ARM template automatically. So if you have a deployment script or a cloud init script or a custom script extension, where you need to get some binaries over to something, you can do that with these new functions. And it opens up a lot of kind of interesting scenarios, and we're seeing some people play around with these functions already and doing some awesome things and kind of pushing the limits already. You can combine this with the JSON function, and you'll actually get full IntelliSense. You can have a JSON file with, policy definition names and IDs or something like that, and then you can use IntelliSense and get full type validation as if it's a native object in Bicep that we understand. There were a couple comments in the issues or in the community call issue asking about like logic app development and injecting reusable code, something outside of modules. So our hope is that this serves some of that need. Our expectation is that there will be edge cases that these functions don't meet. So we're looking forward to you all kicking the tires with this. And especially for the people, if you're here, like Simon, that commented in the GitHub issue, looking for some help in this area, we'd love to get a sense from you all if this is making a difference in kind of day-to-day development. Also from Mikolai, he must be writing code all the time in the playground with his kids. He finished a PR to treat top-level properties as warnings. Basically, for any non-top level property, so anything in the properties body of a resource, we treat those as warnings. So if there's an extra property that you have there or an enum value that we don't know about from Swagger, we make an assumption that the Swagger may be incorrect, and we treat it as a warning as opposed to an error. We thought that. Oh, go ahead.
One more thing to add here. It's actually the well-known top-level properties like identity or zones or plan or skew that become warnings. We still do, like if you create a property that is not recognized as a top-level like a valid top-level property in a resource, we still do an error for that.
Okay, cool. That's good detail. So basically there are new top-level properties that have come out, or there are ones that have existed that we thought we knew which resource type supported those top-level properties, but there are still Swagger mistakes even for those top-level properties, and that was blocking using an identity for a logic app, and there was another one that has a kind property that's important but is not declared in their Swagger. So we've decided to relax this a little bit, and thank you to Mikolai for squeezing this in, because this was becoming blocking, and there's an airplane flying over my head. I'll give that a second to finish.
Nice.
And someone muted me, so. So we now treat these as warnings, and there shouldn't be any of these blocking issues, and if there are, just let us know if you're getting an error that you know is blocking you and is a correct template. We now support ARM templates as a source for modules. So when we first introduced modules, it had to point to another Bicep file. You can now point to an ARM template JSON file. So if you don't want to decompile it, or you have a huge library of ARM templates, you can now use that as an input source for modules. And it's just a way to kind of accelerate onboarding and transitioning to Bicep. So you can have, all of your modules be the JSON files that you've been using, and just make a main.bicep file to kind of tie it all together and start exposing yourself to Bicep and how to use it. So this one is a really nice change, and this is the first kind of step of supporting template specs as a source for modules, which is another thing that we're eager to get to, so you can kind of have native template spec support in Bicep as well. Loops with empty arrays will no longer be fully evaluated. So we had this nasty runtime bug where if you had a loop that was an empty array, we would still look inside of the properties, even though we would never actually deploy that resource. And if your name was wrong, or if you were trying to access the array that didn't have anything in it, we would throw an error in those cases, and that was just a real pain in the butt. Marcin just got that finished. It is checked in. It is actively being deployed right now. So this is a back-end deployment. There's like 1,000,001 things that can go wrong with our back-end deployments, such that they can be rolled back even when they're in the late stages. So it's possible that this may not be out until next week or even next month. We'll share out when this is fully deployed and working. You don't actually need to upgrade your Bicep version to get this benefit. Everyone's going to get this benefit. So hopefully, if everything goes smoothly, this will be out next week. We have a big improvement to our type generation. So we were using basically an older version of this Swagger processing code base. and we've switched to a newer version, and that makes sure that we do more complete type generation, basically. So you may notice new warnings in existing Bicep code where you didn't have warnings before. That's because we actually understand the Swagger better. So we went and updated a bunch of our snippets. We went and updated a bunch of our examples. You may need to do that as well. They should all be warnings. They shouldn't be blocking, but something to be aware of. And then if you've seen, like, you can see some pretty cryptic type names. It'd be like schema:68 or something weird like that. We've solved all of those issues as well. So you should see meaningful type names everywhere. And if you don't, let us know. And then the last one, and this is another really nice one, we have this notion of required properties. So if you're declaring a resource right after the equal sign, you've seen this already where you see required properties, and we'll fill in all the properties based on what we understand for that resource type. We also now show that for any object with required properties. So if you're authoring a module and then you type params and then you do colon, you should see your required properties there now too. And it's just there to assist you when we have enough context and information. And I think I can control this. Okay, cool. Oh no, you're controlling it still, Stephanie. Cool, thank you. The next topic is new maintainers, and I did post a comment in the issue thread about this. Basically, what we're looking to do is expand. We're looking to add 2 or 3 new maintainers to help us deal with the incoming issues and discussions and PRs. So it can be pretty overwhelming, especially when we push a new release. We get a lot of incoming, and just to keep up with that, we're looking for a few other maintainers. You'll be given permission to label issues and move issues into milestones and close issues where there's duplicates or if we've resolved the issues, and then also have permissions to review PRs, but you won't be given permissions to merge PRs yet. So if this goes well, we want to keep adding maintainers and expand the privileges of those maintainers to the point where we hopefully have non-Microsoft folks able to merge pull requests, but we're not there just yet. And our intention is to invite these folks to our weekly triage. We do that Thursday afternoons. We can adjust the schedule accordingly if we need to, but we want you basically to feel like part of the product team, and so be there for issue triage and help us kind of deal with the day-to-day of maintaining the project. So if you have been an active contributor, whether that's, you know, running meetups or responding to issues or whatever it is, or if you know someone who has and might be a good candidate and maybe they're not on this call, we have a survey link here, and Stephanie put the survey link in the chat as well, to nominate yourself or to nominate others, and we just ask you to include your name as well as your GitHub handle so we can just take a look at what you've been doing, if anything, in the Bicep repo. And then I think we asked for a little blurb of kind of why you think you'd be a good maintainer. I expect for the people that are filling this out, we'll already know who you are, and it's more of just getting the list together so we have a base to pull from. So please do fill this out, and we will reach out to you with next steps. Before moving on, any questions from anybody about what this looks like? And we should say, and Stephanie mentioned that this is our first community call, and for most of the team, running projects like this is pretty new to us, even though we've been doing it for almost a year now. So we're looking for advice and help on how to do this right. And if you have any ideas or suggestions, and you've done this in other projects, definitely share your wisdom. We're looking for help here as well. Pinaki, you're on mute. Pinaki, you're on mute.
Yes, sorry, Alex. So what I have to say is some feedbacks and comments I've been getting when I'm actually deploying Bicep infrastructure as a code, either as a GitHub task or even Azure DevOps. 2 things comes in. First is there any way of switch available or coming in where given the main .bicep file, it extracts the parameter file for me, which I can say, dev.params, test.params, then I can apply that into my pipeline. Because on my main bicep, I just want to say params, my name string equals this, required, not required. And the second thing they're asking is, how would Bicep take care of a state, just like if you are talking against Terraform remote state kind of things? So how does it actually work? Or does it actually maintain a remote state with what if?
Sure. So the parameters function I'll talk about, or auto-generating parameters I'll talk about in a second, and then deployment stacks we can talk about at the end. There was another question about the status of deployment stacks, and that's our answer to tracking state and dealing with kind of the lifecycle management that we see in other products like Terraform and Pulumi. So we will get to that at the end, I promise.
Thank you.
Stefan, you had a question about expectations in terms of hours to be a maintainer. So we have the triage once a week, and that's a 1-hour triage. I wouldn't consider it required. I think we'd love to have you there, but if you can't make it for whatever reason, I think that's fine. And I think, maybe an hour collectively over the week of just kind of paying attention to incoming and helping us out on a day-to-day basis. If you can deal with, one issue every other day or a couple issues every day, I wouldn't expect it to be much more than an hour or 2 hours a week. But in fairness, I think we're still trying to get a sense of what this is going to be like. So it may be less than that. It may be more than that. And maybe we need to add more maintainers. So it's going to be something we kind of figure out as we go. But good question. Any other questions before moving on to the other discussion topics that were raised in the GitHub issue? Cool. Okay, so these were all the topics that people submitted comments in the community call issue. So we're trying to get to everything. I hope we didn't miss anything, but please let us know if we did. There's a comment about using modules and what if, and that what if kind of doesn't work if you're using modules. Basically, the issue is that if there's a runtime function in the parameters of a nested deployment, so that's like in the weeds of what we're actually generated when you're using modules. What happens is what if kind of short circuits. It doesn't know how to deal with that, and then it kind of gives up, and so it doesn't show you any of the resources in that nested template or in that module. This is pretty low level work, and I think we're a little scared to touch it, to be totally transparent. So we're going to go really slowly and carefully, but we've just started the work on this, and we think we can get to it by the end of the year. So hopefully this is something that we'll just be able to resolve. Same with greedy conditional evaluation. So this is very similar to the loops issue that we just fixed. Basically, if you have a resource or a module that is conditional, we still evaluate all the properties and check that the name is valid and so on, which is really frustrating. And you have to kind of continue to do that condition check for every relevant property. So it's not a fun authoring experience. We think we're going to fix this before the end of the year as well. And it'll be really nice to put these kind of two fundamental runtime issues to bed, thank goodness. There's a bunch of requests for a native parameters file. So I'm now on the third bullet. The parameters file, we ask you to author it in JSON just like with an ARM template. So it's the same schema. It's not particularly fun to author. In the ARM tools extension for ARM templates in VS Code, we have a function to auto-generate parameters, which can make this a little bit easier to deal with. And you can actually link the parameters file to your ARM template, and we do some further evaluation in the tooling there. We basically want to do the same thing for Bicep. So before we do like a whole new schema that's kind of Bicep native for parameters, we want to have the same experience to auto-generate and link the parameters file, and we can do some really kind of impressive validation once we know all of those values. So that's going to be our first two steps, and then If those two things are not enough, we'll revisit this decision, and maybe at that point we'll introduce a native parameters file, or I know it's been brought up to use YAML instead of JSON. All of those things are on the table, but we want to do these two things first. The next one is the scope functions. So I think Stefan was asking about these scope functions. He's doing a lot of governance work, and that involves a lot of the higher scope work, like in the management group and the tenant. The first bullet, the management group and tenant function. So if you want to create a management group and set the management group to be a child of the current scope, is kind of a common scenario that people want to do. Can we go back one slide, Stephanie? I'm seeing extensibility overview. Okay, cool. Now we're good. We just added, so basically these functions were missing from the runtime. We kind of fake it in Bicep, and the seams will show depending on how you use those functions. We've added those to the runtime properly. Those are not fully rolled out either, but they're checked in and they are being rolled out slowly. Exposing them in Bicep is relatively trivial. So once they're rolled out and once we've validated that they're working correctly, we can expose them in Bicep, and you can do some more scenarios for the functions with no arguments. So management group, open parens, close parens will work everywhere. There are these other functions that have arguments that we also fake. So if you need to set the scope to another resource group or set the scope to another subscription, we let you say subscription parens and then give us a subscription ID. Those are also fake Bicep only functions. And so what we're doing, sorry about the alarms, I can't do anything about it. The scope functions with arguments we need to add to the runtime as well. We haven't started that yet. I hope that we start the work in the next 3 to 6 months, but we do need some more time on that one. The next one is existing for non-puttable resources, basically read-only resources. So there are things like built-in policies and built-in role definitions that exist at the tenant scope that you can't use existing for because we don't really understand anything that's non-writable. We are going to fix this. We think we're going to get to this in 3 to 6 months. Now I'm on the second to last bullet. The terser resource type declarations. We don't have a real meaningful update here. So this is the ability to not have to deal with API versions directly. You can use an alias or something like that. So you can say the type is just compute or VM or something like that. We frankly still need to do the design for this. This kind of keeps getting bumped down the priority list because it's not really impacting day-to-day work. The IntelliSense is really good, so authoring a type isn't so onerous, but it can be frustrating in certain scenarios, like Kubernetes clusters that have a totally different type name and things like that. We have, if someone can post the GitHub issue for this, there are some nuances that we can try to get into later, but I want to keep going, of why this is not super straightforward. It kind of has impacts throughout the language and for other potentially future scenarios that we're considering. So we need to spend some like real solid time with our heads down doing some design work here. If you want to go through that issue and you have some design proposals, please do share them. We will take a look at them, and I'm hoping that we can start focusing on this hopefully before 1.0, but it might need to slip past 1.0. And then the last one, reference service principal by name. This will be addressed by extensibility for Bicep. So Anthony's going to talk about in a second more detailed plans around extensibility for Bicep. We're going to add a Microsoft Graph or AAD provider in addition to a Kubernetes provider. That will allow you to query AAD directly and query by service principal name and get the object ID from it. So this will be a little bit easier and feel a little bit more native to do some of these things. So we're pretty excited about what we think we can do with extensibility. And so that's a way that we'll deal with those types of problems. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Anthony to give a rundown of extensibility.
Hi. Yeah, so I wanted to highlight this just because, I've created a proposal issue in the GitHub repo for this, but it's obviously something that's easy to miss. And I think it's something that's like really important to get some community feedback on. So Bicep extensibility, here we're basically talking about being able to author and deploy resources that aren't ARM resources in Bicep. So I've put a little screenshot proof of concept on the right of the slide. Some of the syntax hasn't been implemented yet, so you're seeing underlines, and for example, the import statement should be highlighted in purple. But it just kind of gives you an idea of the approach we're thinking. So the things that are new, you've got the import statement, which is kind of registering that you want to use a provider. And in this example, we're basically taking an AAD Azure Active Directory and working with Azure Active Directory resources. So we've got the deployment of a Azure Active Directory application. We're then taking some properties from that application, we're passing them to a Azure Active Directory service principal. And they look very similar to ARM resources. One of the things to note is the kind of AAD prefix. So we need some sort of prefix for the extension provider. And then the fact that you're no longer constrained to the whole like properties, name, location business that you get with ARM resources. So I'm just wanted to talk over the plans that we have. I've kind of broken this into two phases. Phase one, we basically kind of need to deal with all the kind of details of this work. So we need to kind of lay the groundwork for non-ARM resource support. There's a bunch of changes we're going to need to make in the deployments engine, in Bicep, in the ARM JSON itself, and we're going to need to kind of like decide what this contract of ARM being able to talk to an extension provider is going to look like. So how I'm planning on approaching this is just basically taking a small number of providers, 1, 2, or 3, going through that implementation process with them, and kind of like figuring out where the issues are, the details, and trying to like close on that contract itself. And it's the sort of thing where like I can just see, you know, there are going to be unforeseen issues that we're going to run into. So here, you know, we're trying to get this in for the Bicep 1.0 release. We want to kind of make sure that we've got a good idea of all the changes that we do need to make to Bicep before we go through that major release, just in case there are any kind of breaking changes or major language changes that we do need to make. And then so for phase 2, at this point we want to open it a bit more. We want to have we want to kind of like open this up for other teams to author extensions. And we don't really have a time frame for this at the moment, but there are, you know, there are kind of more complexities involved with opening this up further, I think. So I've put a link to the proposal. As I mentioned, it would be great to get like you know, as much feedback as we can on this, because it really helps us kind of like drive like what we're actually doing here. Stephanie, if you don't mind just pasting that link in the chat as well, that'd be great. So we'd really like your feedback on just the kind of overall design, anything that we're missing, anything that you'd like us to change. If you've got providers that you'd really like to see implemented for phase 1, along with the kind of use cases you have in mind, that would also be really valuable. And then just anything else you have to share on that issue. So we'd just love to get as much feedback as possible on the issue. Okay, so just after going through that, I wondered if anyone had any questions about this specifically. Stanislav, which AAD objects will support? So we're working pretty closely with the AAD team. The two we've really looked at for now are applications and service principals, group assignments, groups, things like that. But you know, really, we just kind of want like a one-to-one parity with the Graph API. So I think we're kind of exploring what specifically we're going to implement there. And then a question from Marcel: what do you see as a provider? So the provider is going to be, I see the provider as like the code package that is running in ARM and is able to talk to these different resources, and the types that are available in Bicep. Does that answer your question?
Well, 1 second. Yeah. So you need it to be supported by the Azure Resource Manager, or also things outside of the Azure Resource Manager?
So here we're talking about things outside of Azure Resource Manager. So Azure Active Directory, for example.
And is there any roadmap whatsoever on the far end of the line that will people be able to implement their own?
That's something I think we're still discussing at this point. Alex, do you have an answer on that?
Yeah, I think, our focus right now is to kind of light up very specific scenarios like AAD, but there's also like storage data plane and things of that nature that we think are also relevant. Key vault data plane is another. And we want to be really careful with kind of unleashing the ability to have kind of a generic provider model. So once we get these done, we'll kind of take a wait and see approach to see if we should expand it beyond that and what that would look like and how do we maintain it and so on.
Cool, thanks. It's understandable that you first want to have a working project, so.
I think Marcel, you asked a question earlier in the chat as well. I noted it down. You were asking about whether we'll be supporting .NET for extensibility. I think that's one of the things we're kind of exploring at the moment. So the initial set of extensions will definitely be .NET, but I'm trying to design the contracts in a way that it can be implemented by whichever language you want to implement it in. So that's something we're thinking about for the future.
Yeah, that's very cool, because I can imagine a lot of people that are using Bicep are not per se developers. And the learning curve for .NET is quite intense if you're coming from a PowerShell background.
Yep.
So I can imagine that something else like Python or, I don't know, TypeScript is a bit more forgiving.
Yep. Yeah, totally makes sense.
Do you want to support Azure DevOps as well in the phase 1 for extensibility? Because that will really help to make the whole thing, landing zone governance thing, complete.
I mean, if you wouldn't mind just kind of like typing your thoughts up on that and putting that in the issue, that would definitely be helpful. I guess for me, I'm not totally I'm not super experienced with Azure DevOps, so I'm not sure about the specific scenarios you'd be looking to light up. But if you have details of that would be great to share.
Yeah, cool. I will see if I can write something up in
Awesome.
GitHub.
Thank you.
Cool.
And what we're looking for there is basically examples of what kind of resource types you would want to deploy with a Bicep file that are kind of specific to DevOps.
I can give you one example. If you look at the Azure MCOF that is made by Terraform, which actually deploys a whole landing zone with a project and Git repos and all sorts of things. Ideally, we want to recreate this with Azure native tools. And if Bicep would be able to support stuff like this, that would be really helpful, because why we're escaping now to Terraform is because it can do the whole thing from A to Z. And now with ARM templates or Bicep, you can only do parts of it and escape to AZ commands or PowerShell in between. And then you have the whole YAML pipelines to glue the whole thing together.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's why one declarative language to support this would actually be very helpful.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. I think we can go over to the next slide then.
All right, so here's our Q&A. Everyone has already been asking questions in the chat, so let's get started with. So there was a question by Sivadeep Panda. Any roadmap for Azure DevOps component support? I know that Anthony doesn't know too much about DevOps. Do you guys have an answer for this, Marcin, Marcus, Alex?
I think it's on the short list. I mean, I think basically anything Azure branded or adjacent that we may or may not own is definitely on the short list for Bicep where it makes sense. So being able to create DevOps entities, whether it's pipelines or repos or what have you, GitHub actions, repos, etc. All those things I think are fair game and make sense in kind of the end-to-end that we're thinking about. So just a matter of priority and order.
Okay. Alex Chrome asked the question about what if. Do you expect that to be one big fix later in the year, or do you expect smaller incremental improvements?
With regard to fixing that particular bug, I think our intention is to fix that in its entirety in one shot, but I think that's very dependent on the investigation. So we may find that for certain expressions, we can evaluate it more fully, but for others, it's more challenging for some reason that we don't know at this moment. But we do want to get that bug kind of squashed in one shot. As it relates to kind of the larger set of what if noise and other issues with what if, and I know Stan had reached out about that as well. I think it is a difficult problem, to be completely frank. The swaggers are extremely inaccurate, and for as long as they are inaccurate, it's a very difficult problem to get our hands around. I think the good news is that with Bicep and with a lot of the like kind of cross Azure tooling efforts, like around CLI and Terraform and PowerShell, there's a growing understanding that the swaggers are the only way, accurate swaggers are the only way out of this problem. So I think there's a lot of pipelines and whatnot and processes in the background that are picking up steam to get the swagger issues corrected. And I think the teams are starting to realize, the individual resource provider teams are starting to realize how important those swaggers are. So it's a very slow moving ship. I do think we're turning in the right direction, but it should get continuously better. I know we haven't been super active in the what if repo itself, but part of the reason is because there's usually not a lot we can do. So we can tag the what if issue so you can know that it's because it's a default value is missing, or it's a read-only property, or it's some larger resource provider bug. But beyond that, there's not a ton that we can do about it other than make sure that the issue is tracked in the places it's supposed to be tracked. So that's kind of the lowdown on the status of what if. And I think I answered your question, Alex, but let me know if I did not.
That was great, thank you.
Cool.
Joshua Waddell asked, what are the plans to deal with non-Azure resource creation and timeout implications?
We'll have a contract that the providers will implement, and we'll have a timeout associated with it. There'll be a default timeout if it doesn't get implemented, and I think we'll have the ability to customize that timeout if the provider has a better understanding of what those timeouts should look like. And Anthony, let me know if I botched that.
Sorry, I was reading the comments. Sorry, I totally missed what you said.
The timeouts for non-Azure providers. I think what we're planning to do is have a default timeout, and then with the ability for providers to set more precise timeouts if they know about them.
Yep, that sounds right.
Cool.
Is there any Azure certification at the moment that covers Bicep?
Good question. This was asked yesterday. I forgot where. I don't know really anything about how those certifications work, to be totally honest. It's kind of handled by a totally separate group. I know, like when we were working on blueprints, we didn't do anything to be part of some of these exams, and we were just in them all of a sudden. So I expect the same thing to happen with Bicep. I think the teams that manage those certificates do a pretty good job of knowing the latest and greatest. So I would expect those to be a part of the exams if they are not already a part of them.
Alex Den Nieuwenboer had asked, when is the release plan for the ability to target multiple scopes within the same Bicep file using target scope?
Good question. We don't have that work scheduled. If someone can find that GitHub issue and people can upvote it, that is a good way of kind of bumping it up on our radar. I don't know, Anthony or Marcin, if we've taken a look at how complex the work is there for multiple target scopes, but we do get the ask every once in a while, so we may need to bump up the priority on that one.
I think the main thing there was traceability is what we were wondering about, right? Like just the kind of auditability if you allow deploying resources to different scopes from within a single template.
Auditability, sorry, in kind of what sense?
So I mean, if I have a resource group template that deploys a subscription scoped resource, where do you actually show the information about that resource that's deployed? Like if you're looking at the subscription resource, where does the log show up? Like how do you trace it back to the deployment that created it?
Got it. So yeah, if if someone's able to find the thing, I'm now on my phone, so I'm really just losing technology by the second. If someone can post that issue, and we can kind of bump the thread and people can upvote it, and we kind of pick up the discussion and try to get it prioritized.
There's been a question on, or quite a few people have asked about deployment stacks. What's the plan? What's the update?
So deployment stacks, for those who have not heard about it before, is basically an enhancement to all deployments. So instead of doing a regular deployment, you'll deploy a deployment stack. And the idea there is to give you better lifecycle management. So today, templates are kind of fire and forget. And you're responsible for cleaning up resources and making sure you know what is part of the app or the environment or whatever kind of virtual scope you want to call it. Deployment stacks is kind of meant to track all of that for you. So you can imagine being able to delete a stack and delete everything that the stack is managing, and the template or the Bicep code, whatever's in there, would define what is in the stack. And we don't care if it is cross subscription or cross resource group or what have you. Whatever we see, whatever resource IDs we see deployed as part of the stack, that will be what I've been calling the virtual scope. I don't know if that's what we're going to call it in documentation. And if you remove something from your template, we'll know to remove it optionally if you want the resource to be deleted as part of updating the stack. The goal is for that to be in private preview by the end of this month, by the end of July. We're in like the late stages and things tend to slip out week by week at this point. But I have to imagine the private preview will be out in August at the latest. And then the goal would be to public preview certainly by the end of the year, and GA to follow shortly after that.
I realized that I totally misunderstood Alex's question about multiple target scopes. So the question is rather, it's not about being able to deploy different resources at different scopes within one template. It's about being able to author a template that supports different scopes. So if you have a resource that can be deployed at different scopes, like, can that template be reusable?
Right.
But yeah, in terms of timeframes, I'm not really sure. I don't think it's assigned to any. It's not assigned to any project right now. So I think if people could show feedback by thumbs ups on the issue, that would be helpful for us to kind of track that.
Marcin, Barbara had asked a question about the Bicep registry, especially about private registry.
Sorry, I missed the question, I guess. Yeah, so we are definitely planning to support private registries. It's actually one of the main requirements of the technologies that we're looking at. If you are interested in looking at the details of our investigations, it's actually all public. I'm going to share a link to a query that shows you all of the issues they're tracking, basically registry-related work. Let me paste it in right now into the chat. Yeah, Teams issue, sorry. Except that didn't work right. Let me try again. That's a better link. Yeah, I just pasted in basically a link to the issue query that shows all of our discussions. And there's the main story is the one called story-registry. And that covers a lot of the requirements that we want to make sure that our choice has, if we can make it possible.
Also, I'm sorry if I'm missing some of these questions. If you want, you guys can raise your hand and ask them directly, like unmute yourself and ask them directly. Let's see. I know Chris Lewis, you asked a question about the process for requesting an update to the Swagger. Did Anthony answer your question fully?
Yeah, he pointed me to the right
Perfect.
repo for that. It's just, it's one of those things that, specifically if you put one of the newer VM sizes in your template, they're always showing up as a warning because that stuff is changing so quickly.
Right. I think the key with this, to be totally frank, is to make a lot of noise. And when customers make noise, we can pass that on to the relevant team. The end goal is to get the teams to understand the importance of Swagger. If it doesn't affect them day to day, then they don't care about it. And until I'm the CEO of Azure, it's not going to happen overnight. So we just need to make sure that teams are aware of it and that they understand how it's affecting their customers. So just let us know, file an issue, and we'll route it to the right team.
Is there any thoughts of doing something like a C++ pragma, ignore this error kind of thing?
We
I know
have
it's
a
probably not ideal, but
It is something that we are planning to do with the linter framework, and that will include also ability to suppress the compiler, like built-in warnings. So that's something like that is coming. Not necessarily like a pound pragma or hash pragma, but something like that, potentially a decorator, or like we haven't closed on the syntax yet, but some mechanism of doing it inline in the source file.
yeah, certainly. And I swear it's always the enums that are always the ones that are acting up.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other part of the problem is that the team, basically updating Swagger it's an onerous task, and teams want to avoid it if they can, especially with something like an enum where the property is there, but maybe they don't keep track of the latest enums. I know we're guilty of this for deployment scripts because we have a property for the CLI version and the PowerShell version, and keeping up to date with that is a pain. So I think the other thing that we probably should invest more in and look into more is how can we make these Swagger updates easier for teams so that they don't see it as a frustrating task that may introduce breaking changes and so on.
One other thing that's been on my mind for a while is I think in Swagger it's technically possible to declare an extensible enum. So basically saying these are the values I expect, but I also allow any other string as well. So I do wonder if like that's something that we could represent in the Bicep type system as well.
Yeah. I was about to ask about the same exact thing. I feel like that's something we should do, actually. Basically, just make it so we can write in a value if they marked it as an extensible enum in the Swagger, but most teams do.
With all of this in the ARM, you've got I don't know what they're called, but like if you're doing a region, they're all that's a what do they call it? It's a value that's predefined in the ARM world, not as a string or an array. I guess it might be an enum, but for some of these things like VM sizes, can we flip that into something that Bicep is in control of, as opposed to the REST API? It's probably moving away from where you want to be, though.
Yes, if I may,
challenge is
that would be allowed values attributes, right?
Well, not really, because you're basically saying instead of allowed values and listing all the SKUs for a VM, you say this is not a string, it's a VM size variable.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Yes. So, well, I guess there's two things that I heard. Maybe I misheard. One is Bicep being responsible for these type definitions such that we control the list of enums. The fear there is just getting overwhelmed, where we couldn't keep if the VM team can't keep up with their own enums, we wouldn't be able to keep up with the broader set of enums across resource types. So we do definitely want to keep it at rest, and that way Bicep benefits as well as the rest of the ecosystem. So it's worth it even though it's a bummer and we could probably fix it pretty easily in the short term. The right long-term fix is for the teams to care about it.
No, exactly, and I kind of,
Yeah. The second item, I mean, or at least what I heard, was being able to set, instead of manually declaring allowed values where you list all of the SKUs that you know about and you're essentially repeating information that we should hopefully know about in Bicep, there is a proposal somewhere to basically call more specific types. So instead of saying a parameter is of type string, which just like you said, Chris, we can set a parameter of type compute.bm.skus. And then we would just access the type because we already have all that information. So there's something really, yeah, okay, that's cool to see all those flaws. It's a very elegant solution, and we need to prioritize it like the rest of these things. Any other questions that we've missed?
There's a question by Simon Wallen. I know that there's been a little back and forth between him and Anthony. Did you want to unmute yourself and ask about it, Simon?
Is it about clarifying, are we .NET Standard or .NET Core?
No, there was, I'm not sure exactly about the use case, so it'd be good if maybe the person, Simon, you could unmute yourself and maybe explain, because I'm still not entirely clear.
Hi, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, cool, thank you. So we're doing the Bicep PowerShell module, and we currently only support PowerShell Core or PowerShell version 7 and above. And since we are using the Bicep DLLs directly and not depending on calling the Bicep executable, and that way we can do a lot of things like compiling in memory and get object backs without writing files. And that's working really good, but we get questions on if we can get our module supporting Windows PowerShell. But since Windows PowerShell is running on .NET Framework,
yeah,
we can't load the Bicep DLLs into .NET Framework.
Gotcha. Yeah, so we thought about downgrading to Net Standard 2, but it's just we were using some features of .NET Standard 2.1, and I think the main one is just they added improved like nullability attributes, because we have nullability enabled in Bicep codebase, and it's been saving us basically, like we no longer have null refs in our code basically because of that. And we've been using the attributes to avoid it. So if we had to downgrade to 2.0, we would have to remove those attributes and probably lose some of that coverage, which is why I kind of said it's not likely that we would want to do that without more justification.
Cool.
I wonder, like, do you have the potential of using? We have the Bicep MS Build package, which includes, oh sorry, not MS Build, but we have a NuGet package out there which includes the Bicep EXE. If you were to invoke that for .NET Framework PowerShell, because I'm guessing at that point you only really have to support Windows anyway. I'm wondering if that's an option, just like invoking the CLI.
We can download the exe file. We used to do that, but the problem is that since the exe file only omits strings, we have to string parse all the output, and it's not very exact, or like we have like all the output from Bicep has to be like regex parsed into PowerShell, and that's very unreliable. So using the DLLs directly gives us real .NET objects that we can interact and work with.
Actually, I had a thought, because the issue is that the runtime just isn't available. Like if you could create a wrapper application that is published either as a single self-contained exe or even just includes the .NET runtime, could you then just have a normal classic framework thing call into it and just communicate with like JSON or something?
Yeah, potentially we could do like our own JSON interop or something and just pass JSON back and forth. That could work. Currently, we're loading the DLLs in its own assembly load context in .NET Core, because the DLLs are conflicting with the Azure PowerShell DLLs.
Yeah,
so we can't load them into the same process. And that works really well. And we have a pre-release. I think it's released today or tomorrow. But it's yeah, we have gotten quite a few questions on supporting Windows PowerShell, and I just wanted to check with you and see like if you would consider targeting net standard. I personally don't really care. I don't use Windows PowerShell anyway, so I'm totally happy with just using PowerShell 7.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be tough because it's just will cause us some complexity, I think, which is why we're kind of resistant to doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I understand. That's great. I just
Yeah.
wanted to yeah, have a little bit more of an official answer.
Yeah, so I think you can quote us on that one.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcin. Nico Mix, looks like you had a question about Bicep UI. Did you want to ask that directly and unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. So the question was just because we have an ARM UI, the possibility to customize the wizard experience from the Azure portal when we use the template for the creation. So my question would be, do we already have kind of a concept or idea to like adapt this for Bicep as well, or would we just add another JSON file to the Bicep file for that?
So there's a couple things. One is that file, that create UI definition file, the goal would be to just use that. So the portal UX understands that file. They're actually going to be revising the schema of that file. We're going to support it natively in template specs. So if you publish your ARM template generated from a Bicep file, you can create a template spec with a UI definition associated with it. And we're going to optimize that workflow so that you can create a template spec with a Bicep file, the same way you can create a deployment with a Bicep file. The other aspect of this, if you're not necessarily using template specs, is we want to build a service, an endpoint, an API to compile and decompile Bicep code. And that way the portal can take advantage of it. So you can provide Bicep code and the portal can deal with it is basically the goal. So once that's done, we should be able to reuse the already existing components to kind of deliver, I think, the end-to-end that you're already using today for ARM templates.
Okay, just to maybe re-emphasize a bit on that, because so the reason why I'm asking for that is because like in Bicep, we have all these kind of parameter validations with also the like attributes or how you call them, where we can also like see, for example, if the name is too long, too short, and stuff like that. So the UI definition, in my opinion, would also benefit from the same validation. That's why kind of I ask if there would be some sort of adaptation from the Bicep side to get the validation into this UI definition file as well.
I thought that the UI definition has kind of a similar and kind of more expanded set of checks that you can do. Is that missing from UI definition today? Or I might just be misunderstanding something?
No, just in my opinion, it's kind of redundant. Because we already have kind of the information then in the Bicep template. So if we could generate, I don't know, maybe from the parameter file or add some further attributes based on the parameters and generate this UI definition file, I think this would add a lot of benefit.
I see. I got it. So the goal is not need the UI definition file and just auto-generate it from the Bicep code. Is that right?
Yeah, something like this. I think this would be great.
Got it. I think the missing piece is that UI definition file is much more feature rich in terms of the UI that you can compose. The portal today does auto generate. If you give it an ARM template and eventually a Bicep file, it'll auto generate a UI for validations, is how I understand it. But we would need to UI definition stuff into Bicep, and we haven't really had that conversation yet. If you want to file an issue in Bicep just so we can track it, we can try to pick up the conversation from there, if that works for you, Nico.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
Cool.
All right, so it looks like we're out of time. I just wanted to say thank you guys for all of you guys for coming. We will be hosting this every month. there was a lot of questions today, but we want to usually take this time to get to know you guys more when there's fewer people, fewer questions, and even see what you guys are doing, see if our customers, all of you guys want to do demos to show us the work you're doing. Just really depends on how many questions we get and how many people show up. So if you guys have more questions, you can always put an issue or discussion up on our GitHub. And yeah, thank you guys for coming. Yeah, it looks like there's still a couple of questions. If you guys can answer them in chat, that'd be great. Thank you guys all for coming. I will see you guys next month if you guys come then.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.